Hello everyone, this is Jotto and welcome to another deck tech. Now, I've been tinkering around with a lot of decks recently. This is one of the other decks I've been tinkering around with along with the Shaman. This is a Druid deck. Now, Druid is one of those classes which got absolutely zero hype moving out of Goms and Gnomes because, and I think this is about right, they got two cards. They got Recycle and Grove Tender. That's it. They got nothing else. So, a bit sketchy. But anyway, I've been testing out some ramp stuff. What I figured out is that the format is in two halves right now. There's aggro decks and then there's control decks. The Shaman deck was very, very good at dealing with aggro and also the most control-y deck, which is Control Warrior. This Druid is not as terrible against Priest. Worse against Control Warrior, obviously, but again, it attacks from a different angle, and it's the kind of thing where if you prefer Druid, then you can always play this as opposed to the Shaman deck if you're trying to get an anti-aggro thing. The other thing is the Priest decks have been really powerful coming out of Goms and Gnomes. However, other people have been doing those, so I will be doing the Druid. Anyway, first things first, it's a ramp deck, so you have Innervate, Wild Growth, help you accelerate out. Wrath, also pretty simple, kills all the 2-drops, and you actually cycle this quite a lot. You can cycle out on turn 4 to kill a 2 health minion if you have nothing else to do. So what you do is you just Wrath, draw hero power, kill it, and you essentially kill something for free. Kind of for free. Big Game Hunter, this is necessary right now because of all the handlocks running around, and Druid is not the best at dealing with handlock. So Big Game Hunter makes the cut because you absolutely need it. Grove Tender. Now, this is probably going to be the card I'm going to talk most about, possibly. It's a one-off. Now, the reason it's a one-off is because, it's actually not because the card is bad, it's because it clogs against Priest. You can't really run too many things that are useless against Cabal, against Priest. But anyway, Grove Tender, 3 mana, 2/4, choose one. Each player gets a mana crystal or draws a card. Now, first things first, when you give the mana crystal, you actually get, it's a full mana crystal, so you can use it on that turn, so the Grove Tender actually costs 2. But your opponent gets the first full turn of the mana crystal. The each player draws a card option is better for you if it's in top deck mode because you get to use it immediately, but it's worse for you earlier in the game because you don't get to use your options immediately. So, pretty much they're symmetrical. They just are symmetrical. But there's some tinkering you can do with Grove Tender. First things first, Wild Growth was always good because it ramps. However, a lot of people assume it's good because it ramps and your opponent doesn't. Yes, that's part of it. However, if you're playing a ramp Druid, your mid to late game is probably better than 90% of the decks you'll be playing against. It just is. The only deck I think that has better late game than Ramp Druid is Control Warrior. A deck that has its entire ability to win within late game legendaries. Just put that in perspective. So when you Grove Tender and give both players Mana Crystal, they get to play their Piloted Shredder, and then you play your Druid of the Claw or your Sludge Belcher into Sunwalker, into Ancient of War, and to Ragnaros, and you just crush them. It doesn't matter if they're on curve with you, your stuff is bigger. Why? Because you're playing Druid, they have the biggest stuff, and also because you're playing a higher curve ramp deck. So the Grove Tender effect on mana crystals is not symmetrical really. Now, on the drawing a card, which you actually want to be doing against certain other decks, the way I figured this out is it depends on your hand. It's a bit complicated. I mean, late in the game you always pretty much want to draw a card. However, against control decks, the draw card becomes better because they can't curve properly, but then you still want to curve on your end of things. But if it's against an aggro deck, giving them mana crystal doesn't matter as much, whereas giving this a card is actually pretty bad. But then Grove Tender is good against aggro because it just kills a bunch of stuff. So it's a bit complicated to explain, but most of the time against control decks, the actual decider is if it's like on turn 10 or something, you usually always draw. Unless you need to like play Grove Tender than 8 mana or something like a Ragnaros. However, early in the game, against control decks, you choose the Mana Crystal option if you have no 4-drop, which is possible. I mean, there's only one 4-drop that you can play that isn't reactive in this deck. But if you have a bunch of 5-drops, you need to play the Grove Tender. If there's a gap in your curve, 4, which they could be. You get the mana crystal because it means you curve out better, and your opponent can curve out as well. It doesn't really matter. The point is that you don't stumble. However, if you do have a curve, you just draw a card. That's pretty much how that works, and it works well. So Grove Tender, better than I thought it would be. I did try to. It was good, but it was bad against Priest. So can't really run double Grove Tender because of Priest. Spider Tank. Now, Spider Tank and Harvest Golem were the two fighting over this. I think they're about as good as each other in this type of deck. Harvest Golem is better earlier in the game. However, Spider Tank is a better aggro stop. What do I mean by this? It kills a lot of low drops is the point. It will kill 2 low drops usually. And what really swung this was Harvest Golem will usually kill 2 things as well because of your hero power. And that survives AoE. What swung it was actually, one, this is not horrible against Priest. And by horrible against Priest, I know they can Shrinkmeister it. But if they Shrinkmeister your 3-4 and Cabal, it's not that bad. Whereas if they just use a Cabal on a Harvest Golem, it's miserable. So it's better against Priest. And also, a 3-4 for 3 is better as a top deck late game than a 2-3 with a Death Rattle. Because you can't just ignore it. Spider Tank will actually deal a decent amount of damage on its own for the cost later on in the game, whereas the Harvest Golem will do absolutely jack. It just won't do anything. So, in other words, Spider Tank in here because better top deck, also slightly better against Priest. Now, obviously, Harvest Golem has its merits as well, being it's harder to remove, and that's a big deal, but it's kind of a choose which one you want. They're both amazing cards. I just went for the Spider Tank. Swipe, go to AoE. Really good card, one of the reasons to play Druid. Keeper of the Grove. I said Earthshock was one of the best silences, if not the best silence in the game. I think Keeper might be. I'm seeing a trend here. I tend to play the classes with good silence. But yeah, Keeper of the Grove is absolutely ridiculous. It just is. 4 mana to deal... It's basically Steam Weedle Sniper with an extra health, and you can use it to silence. This is actually one of the reasons why Druid can be good against Handlock. If Druid has an opening hand of Keeper, Big Game Hunter, you usually win against Handlock because you just silence the Drake and hero power it, or just run your small guy into it, and you just Big Game Hunter the Giant, and they lose. So, Keeper of the Grove, one of the best cards in Druid, absolutely insane. One of the single best anti-aggro cards in the entire game. Kills usually 3 cards against aggro. Absolutely ridiculous. And you can also use it for utility silence, which helps with Sylvanas, Karen if anyone's playing it, random Sneeds Old Shredders that show up, things like that. Really, really good card. Mechanical Yeti. Playing Mechanical Yeti over the Shredder. Why? Because kind of the same logic as Spider Tank and Harvest Golem, to be honest. Yes, I have a golden one. I randomly got that out of a pack. But this is also debatable. You can play either Mech Yeti or Piloted Shredder. And I tried both. I prefer Mech Yeti for 2 reasons. One, it's a better aggro stop than Piloted Shredder because with the problem with Piloted Shredder is you can actually just ignore it and then they have to trade it on their turn and the Death Rattle doesn't do anything immediately. They still have to wait a turn to attack with it unless they get like a bluegill or something. So they don't get the full... They don't get that big body on the board for both swings. They get a smaller one on the second one, which makes it worse against aggro. Against control, obviously it can't be AoE'd. Well, I mean, it can, but badly, whereas Mechanical Yeti is not fantastic against AoE, I must admit. It just pretty much dies if they have a big enough one. So that's the downside. However, the upside is it's bigger stats, better top deck, because it's more of a threat on its own. The threat sticks around a bit longer. The Death Rattle is double-sided. Now, I have actually considered running normal Chillwind over Mechanical, and I kind of decided not to, and the reason is that the spare parts don't affect me that much. If you look at my deck, the spare parts don't actually affect that much. On his side, I mean. Like, Reversal Switch doesn't do that much, apart from on Ancient of War. And Finicky Cloaking Fields... Yeah, that's not too bad. There's nothing in the format that I'm really scared. Like, if they Finicky Cloaking Field a threat, I just play it 5-10 or a Sunwalker, and then they still have to go through it. It doesn't matter if it's stealthed. So, them having spare parts is actually not that bad, which is one of the reasons why this deck is actually very good against Mage, because they're playing a bunch of spare parts, and the spare parts don't really damage this deck at all. Now, on your side of things, you can use Reversal Switch to do really silly things. You can give Taunt to extra guys, which is always nice if it's been silenced. You can bounce your Keeper of the Grove. That has happened several times, and it's disgusting. So, the spare part on your side does more than it does on his side, and it's also just a solid guy. Druid of the Claw. Now, Druid of the Claw you can't really mention without talking about Sludge Belcher. These have been competing with each other for a long time now. I decided to play both. I actually think... I'm trying to figure out whether I'm going to get shot for this. I actually think that Druid of the Claw is better than Sludge Belcher right now. The reason is Priest. That's the reason. Yeah, and also Warrior. Deathbite with Death Rattle kills a Sludge Belcher's first half, whereas it doesn't kill Druid of the Claw. Druid of the Claw can also charge. I think Druid of the Claw is a better card than Belcher right now. There's very, very few Black Knights running around. I think both of them are amazing. You want to run both, and you need the Taunt. It's an absolute ridiculous aggro stop with Innervate. I'm talking about both cards at this point. However, it turns out it's the same logic that I'm using with Spider Tank and Mechanical Yeti. At the moment, I think having more stats in one body is better than having stats over two bodies like it was in the Naxxramas metagame. So both these cards are very good. I think Druid of the Claw is slightly better, however. Loatheb, the card that should not really need an explanation at this point. It's absolutely ridiculous. It goes in everything, and it shuts down every control deck for like a turn on its own, and then it kills something. So the card is just insane. So it goes in every deck. Recycle. Possibly the most underhyped card of Druid. Now, on the set review, I said one of. Very good card, one of. And, yep, it's a one of, and it has won me several games. Recycle is one of the most insane hard removal spells in the entire game. It actually deals with literally anything. I have recycled Sylvanas that would have won the game for my opponent. I have recycled Ysera, and then he top decked Ysera, played Ysera, and died because he spent 18 mana on this Ysera, and he drew a card, so still 1 for 1. So, Recycle does not have a drawback, it just doesn't. I have recycled the Kel'Thuzad, and then eventually he got it again, because we went to Fatigue. He eventually got it again, but then I just dealt with it, and it wasn't a problem, because I had set my board up, and when I couldn't deal with the Kel'Thuzad, Recycle did it. It also is really funny against Molten Giants, because they play their Moltens, and then you just recycle one of them, and they don't get their Molten anymore. If they top deck it, it sucks, but they still don't get their Molten anymore. The chances of them top decking that card, by the way, is so ridiculously small that it's actually not even worth thinking about most of the time. The other thing is that, as I said, if they top deck that card, if you recycled something worth recycling, the tempo loss from replaying it immediately will usually lose them the game. So people won't do it. They just won't replay it. When they top deck it, they'll play something else, make up for the tempo loss, then try and play it. And sometimes they can't make up the tempo loss, and they just lose it anyway. So Recycle, at worst, it's the most insane sap ever. And at best, which is most of the time, it just kills anything, and you don't have to worry about the death rattles, anything. I have shuffled in Piloted Sky Golems. That was a lot of fun. I've also shuffled in Injured Blade Masters with Circle of Healing on them, and a couple of the buffs. So you can get rid of some really, really insane things that Druid actually just could not deal with, period, before Golems and Gnomes. It just could not kill them at all. Recycle, absolutely crazy card. Glad to have it. Sunwalker. This is an interesting one. This is in at 2. Now, I actually had Sunwalker in at 1 for the longest time. It actually was Grove Tender that was the 2 of, and then I switched it to Sunwalker. Weirdly enough, you'd think, oh, too many 6-drops. The curve is, like, uniform. It actually plays fairly well. The curve is pretty much uniform. But, Grove Tender, worse against Priest. Sunwalker, pretty good against Priest. And if they Cabal it, it sucks. Like, if they Kabbalah with a Shrinkmeister, it sucks, but it gets under the combo when you play on turn 6, and later on you'll probably have a way of dealing with it anyway. So, it's the kind of thing, you can't just not play anything in your deck that's bad to Shrinkmeister, because that's most of the cards in the game. So you kind of have to play these cards, and it's better than Grove Tender, because they have to have a 2-card combo instead of a 1-card combo, and it's also better against aggro decks. It's really hard to get through a Sunwalker. I mean, Mage have to spend 6 mana to kill it, efficiently. That's Fireball, Hero Power. 6 mana to kill 6 mana, I am okay with this. No one is playing Black Knight. Sunwalker, one of the most painful targets to get Black Knight in the entire game, barring one, which is further down the list. However, I am taking a leaf out of my BK Buffet deck from like ages ago, which had the thing where Black Knight, you can play your Black Knight, but I have 8 taunts. You can only play your Black Knight once. That was the logic I applied, and it still works now. Sylvanas, really good 6-drop, kills control decks, really handy. Black Knight, talked about this guy. There's a surprising amount of taunts running around right now, and no one is playing Black Knight. I don't get it. I do not get why people are not playing Black Knight. It has insane value. Why? Because no one plays around it anymore. Every single time you play in the Druid mirror, every so often, they're just like, turn 6, okay, Druid of the Claw, I could charge it and get value. I'm gonna play taunt because you can't get through it, and then I Black Knight it and they lose. Like, that's actually happening. I don't understand why people are not playing around Black Knight anymore. It's just insane. I don't get it. And it's like, you can play around Black Knight at times. You can play your small taunts first, but people have just been slamming their giant taunts first instead of the small ones. And you can tell because they play the small ones afterwards. And it's just like, okay, Black Knight, kill it. And it's just a ridiculous tempo swing. Card advantage, tempo swing, 4 or 5 for 6 sometimes. Kind of sucks. But the upside is ridiculous. Ancient of Lore. The best Druid card in the game? I think so. I actually called best class minion in the game when I did that top 10 list. May need to revise that. I think a couple of the legendaries trump this now. Maybe. I may come back to that list eventually. But anyway, Ancient of Lore. 7 mana, draw 2, heal. Pretty good. I mean, it's good for the same reason Neptulon is good. It's card draw. However, you can play 2 of them, which makes up for the fact that it's not as good as Neptulon. However, you can also heal yourself. I did, actually, just to note, I did play anti-heal bot in this deck for a while. However, as I went up the ladder, there was less aggro, more control, so I removed it. However, anti-heal bot is something to think about. If you're not running into handlock, and you're running into a bunch of aggro decks instead, remove the big game hunter, add an anti-heal bot. It makes a world of difference. Ancient Allure, though, enough healing once you get to slightly higher ranks when there's a lot more people playing control. Ancient of War, the card which I think no one is talking about right now. Ancient of War has been a card that has been in the game since the beginning, and has been, depending on the metagame, bad or good. There's not really any middle ground with Ancient of War. It's the same with Ragnaros, which we'll get to in a bit. And it's just because of this, Black Knight. If Black Knight is popular, Ancient of War is the single worst tempo loss in the entire game. You play Ancient of War on turn 7, they Black Knight it, and you lose the game. It just happens. It's annoying. However, BK Buffet theory here, if you're playing Druid of the Claw, Sludge Belcher, Sunwalkers, and Ancient of War, they eventually have to use their Black Knight on usually a Sunwalker. You have to use your Black Knight on Sunwalker usually, especially if you're against Druid or Priest. They kind of, if they have Black Knight, Priest usually doesn't, but, I mean, let me just straighten this out. No one's playing Black Knight at the moment, but the point is that even if they do have a Black Knight, it doesn't matter because you have so many taunts. Something I noticed, however, when I was making ramp deck, was thinking, Ancient of War, this is actually worth testing. As it turns out, every single aggro deck in the entire format has 0 ways of killing one efficiently. I have seen people have to double fireball Ancient of Wars because they're cutting polymorph. They don't have polymorph, and no one's running silence apart from Shaman, which is non-existent, I might add, and that's always been a weakness of these ramp decks. No one is running Shaman. No one is running Black Knight. People are cutting Shadow or Death in the mech decks. They're only running a Control Priest, so even Priest can't kill this thing without Vojin. And Vojin only has... You only have 1 Vojin, okay? If they get Vojin on your Ancient War, it sucks. But you have Keeper, which can sometimes silence the Vojin. It's fine. But Ancient War, absolutely impossible to kill for most decks. The only deck in the format that is well equipped to kill an Ancient War right now is Control Warrior. That is it. It's insane. I don't know why this hole has been left in the format where just you can't get past a 10 health taunt. You just can't. Like, aggro decks, they run into a brick wall. Like, it's the thing that used to happen in Zoo for ramp decks, where you play your ramp deck, and then you play against Zoo, and you just go taunt, taunt, taunt. They get through most of them, and you play Ancient War, and they just concede, because they can't kill it. And it's the same at the moment. No one can kill an Ancient War, apart from Shadow or Death, and Vojin, and then Execute. That's pretty much it. There's Siphon Soul as well running around, however, Ancient War, if you innervate it out, goes under Siphon Soul, and if you have Wild Growth with that, it's actually just a massively hard thing to deal with if you're going first, because they can't Siphon Soul it. So there's Ancient War, very, very good against the current format. It's only bad against Handlock and Warrior. Handlock, you've got your own text for it, and Warrior is just kind of a meh matchup which you have to deal with, and there's ways of attacking against it. You could run double recycle, for instance, if you're having problems with Warrior. Now, the last card in the deck is Ragnaros. Now, I'm running Rag, however, I would actually suggest trying out Trogzor, because Ragnaros is Ragnaros, and he is incredibly random. That's kind of half of it. But the other reason is there's no other big game hunter targets in this entire deck. So, Rag is a big game hunter target, and he's the only one. He's good at the moment, but I'd rather have a Trogzor, lower curve. I know it's an extra 7 drop, but it's lower curve, and also doesn't die to big game hunter. So I'd rather play Trogzor, do not have a Trogzor, but Ragnaros is perfectly serviceable. There's a couple other you could try. Foe Reaper, I would not play Sneasel Shredder. I think that thing is too slow even for a ramp deck. The only deck that can get away with a Sneasel Shredder is Priest. So I would not try Sneasel Shredder, maybe Foe Reaper, but most likely Trogzor as being the better late game card here, because Trogzor shuts down all of those spells. Ragnaros shuts down minions, but he's a bit too random. So as I said, I'm playing him because I don't really have anything else that I want to play in this slot, and he's, well, the big guy that wins the game. But Trogzor fills a similar role, and I would highly recommend trying him out instead. But anyway, thank you all for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe. If you have any feedback, put it in the comment section below. This will be with a deck guide and write-up, which will be in the description, so by all means go check that out and put a like on there. So now, this has been Jotto, signing off.